Princess Diana was spending a rare afternoon with William and Harry at a London park when a council officer began forcing a homeless mother and her two young children to leave, calling them a nuisance and visual pollution. Everyone in the park looked away. Then Diana walked over with her sons and said words that made the officer freeze. "They're not bothering anyone. Why are you removing them?" What happened next would expose a systematic policy of criminalizing homelessness and spark Diana's most personal campaign for housing rights. May 1996. Kensington Gardens was filled with Sunday afternoon families. Diana had insisted on this outing. No formal schedule, no photographers, just her and the boys doing something normal. Inspector Philip Wright followed at a distance, trying to give them space while maintaining security. William and Harry were kicking a football back and forth near the round pond. Diana sat on a bench watching them, grateful for these moments of ordinary life that came too rarely. On the bench across the path sat a woman, maybe 32, with two small children, a girl around 6, a boy perhaps 4. They weren't playing or running like the other children. They sat quietly, the mother's arm around both of them, all three watching other families with a stillness that suggested exhaustion. Diana noticed details. The woman's coat was clean but worn at the elbows. The children's shoes were too small. They had a shopping trolley beside the bench filled with plastic bags. Not shopping, Diana realized, but possessions. Everything they owned, probably. A man in a high-visibility vest approached them, council identification badge visible. Graham Blackwell, according to the name tag. He stood over the bench, arms crossed. "Right, you need to move along. Can't be setting up camp here." The woman, Diana would later learn her name was Lauren Thompson, looked up with tired eyes. "We're just sitting. We're not bothering anyone." "You're loitering. This is a family park, not a homeless shelter." "My children are tired. Please, just let us rest for a bit." "I've told you before you can't be here. You're making other visitors uncomfortable." Diana felt her chest tighten. She glanced at the other visitors, families who were indeed looking uncomfortable, but not because of Lauren and her children. They were uncomfortable witnessing someone being humiliated in public and not knowing what to do about it. William had stopped playing, watching the interaction. Harry looked at his mother questioningly. Diana stood up and walked toward the bench. Wright moved to follow, but she signaled him to stay back. "Excuse me," Diana said as she approached. "What's the problem here?" Blackwell turned, ready with his official voice. Then he recognized her. His expression shifted from authority to uncertainty. "Your Royal Highness, I'm just... This woman and her children, this isn't appropriate." "They're sitting on a bench," Diana said simply. "How is that inappropriate?" "They're homeless. They're using the park as accommodation. We have policies about sitting on public benches? About vagrancy, yes." Blackwell was regaining his composure. "The council has regulations about rough sleepers in public spaces. They make families feel unsafe." Diana looked at Lauren and her children. The little girl, Sophie, was crying silently, trying to hide her face in her mother's coat. The boy, Ben, clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, his thumb in his mouth. "They look like a family to me," Diana said, "and they look considerably more scared than threatening." William and Harry had joined their mother now, standing slightly behind her. Harry stared at Ben with the uncomfortable recognition that they were the same age but living completely different realities. "Your Royal Highness, I understand your concern, but I have a job to do. Is the council aware that you're removing children from a public park? That you're telling a mother with two small children they can't rest on a bench?" "It's not about resting. Look at the trolley. They're clearly rough sleeping. We have designated shelters. Are there spaces available in those shelters?" Diana asked. Blackwell hesitated. "That's not my department." "But removing her from this park is your department." Lauren spoke quietly. "The shelters are full. We've been on the waiting list for 3 weeks. I'm not sleeping here. We can't afford that. We're just resting between walking. The library closes at 5. We have nowhere to go until the community center opens for dinner at 7. Diana felt something crack inside her. "So you're walking around London for hours with 2 small children because you have nowhere to sit?" "We try not to stay in one place too long, so people don't notice." "Don't notice that you're homeless," Diana said softly. "Don't notice that we're a problem," Lauren corrected. Blackwell jumped in. It's not personal, it's policy. Rough sleepers create issues, theft, drug use, intimidation of other park users. Has this woman done any of those things? Not that I've witnessed, but then she's being removed for existing while homeless, Diana said, her voice sharper now. That's the policy? Punishing people for not having homes? Other park visitors were watching now. Some sympathetic, some uncomfortable with the confrontation, some clearly agreeing with Blackwell's position. Diana turned to Lauren. How long have you been without housing? 4 months. I had a flat, but I lost my job. Couldn't pay rent. The council said they'd help, but the waiting list is... They said maybe 6 months to a year for family housing. So for a year, you're supposed to what? Walk around London with 2 children? Pretty much, yeah. Diana looked at William and Harry. This was a teaching moment she hadn't planned but recognized as crucial. Boys, do you understand what's happening here? William, mature beyond his 14 years, spoke carefully. She doesn't have a home, and he's making it worse by not even letting her rest. Exactly. Diana turned back to Blackwell. I'd like your supervisor's information. Your Royal Highness, I'm just enforcing council policy? Then I'd like to speak to whoever created that policy. Because telling a mother she can't sit on a public bench with her children isn't policy, it's cruelty. Blackwell's face reddened. I'll note your concerns, but right now I need to ask this family to move along. No, Diana said simply. I'm sorry? I said no. They're not moving. They're sitting on a public bench in a public park. If you have a problem with that, call your supervisor. But I'm not watching you force a woman with 2 small children to leave simply because she's homeless. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, but felt longer. Blackwell looked around at the crowd that had gathered, at Diana standing protectively near Lauren's bench, at William and Harry watching him with judgment in their young eyes. I'll call my supervisor, he finally said, walking away with his phone. Diana sat down next to Lauren. I'm Diana. I know, Lauren said quietly. I'm Lauren. This is Sophie and Ben. Hello, Sophie. Hello, Ben. Diana smiled at the children. Ben peeked at her from behind his mother, still clutching his rabbit. Harry, unable to contain his curiosity, asked, Where do you sleep? Harry, William hissed, but Diana shook her head. It's all right. It's a fair question. She looked at Lauren. Where do you sleep? Different places. Sometimes the community center lets families stay in their lounge overnight. Sometimes churches. Sometimes we just walk until the kids fall asleep. Then I find a doorway where we're not too visible. Sophie spoke for the first time, her voice small. Mummy doesn't sleep, she watches. Diana felt tears threaten. She blinked them back. How old are you, Sophie? 6. Ben is 4. We had a flat, but we had to leave. And now we're between homes? Lauren said, using the euphemism that felt less shameful. You're homeless, Diana said gently. And there's no shame in that. The shame is on a system that puts you in this situation and then criminalizes you for existing in public spaces. Blackwell returned with his supervisor, a woman in her 50s who clearly hadn't expected to deal with Princess Diana on a Sunday afternoon. Her name tag read, Janet Morrison, Council Housing Officer. Your Royal Highness, Janet began diplomatically, I understand there's been a misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Diana replied. Your officer was removing a homeless family from a public park. I'd like to know if that's official council policy. Janet chose her words carefully. We have guidelines about rough sleeping in public spaces. For safety reasons. Whose safety? This woman and her children? Or the people who are uncomfortable being reminded that homelessness exists? It's both. Rough sleeping can be dangerous. We want to encourage people to use appropriate services. What appropriate services? This woman told me the shelters are full and the housing list is a year long. The situation is complex. It seems quite simple to me. People need homes. You don't have enough homes. So instead of solving that problem, you criminalize the visible symptoms of it. You remove homeless people from public spaces so the rest of us don't have to see them. Janet looked genuinely uncomfortable. What would you suggest, Your Royal Highness? I'd suggest starting by not treating this woman like a criminal for sitting on a bench with her children. Over the next hour, Diana learned more about Lauren's situation. She'd worked as a care assistant until her employer went bankrupt, lost her flat 2 months later, applied for emergency housing but was told she wasn't priority, despite having 2 small children, because she hadn't been formally evicted. She'd left voluntarily when she couldn't pay rent, which apparently made her intentionally homeless in council terminology. "So the system punishes you for trying to do the right thing," Diana said. "Pretty much." Diana made several calls, first to her private secretary, then to housing charities she supported, then to a solicitor she knew who specialized in housing rights. By evening, she'd found Lauren and her children temporary accommodation, a charity-run flat where they could stay while applying for permanent housing. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe and warm and had beds. As they prepared to leave the park, Sophie tugged on Diana's coat. "Thank you for not letting the mean man make us go." Diana crouched to Sophie's level. "You weren't doing anything wrong. You have as much right to be in this park as anyone else. Mummy says people don't like us because we don't have a home. Then those people are wrong, and I'm going to try to change that." That evening, Diana called Emma Bradford. "I want to talk about homelessness, not the way charities usually talk about it, abstract numbers and policy papers. I want to talk about what it actually means, what it looks like, how we treat people experiencing it." The article ran 3 days later. Diana spoke about meeting Lauren in the park, about watching a council officer try to remove a family from a public bench, about the systematic criminalization of homelessness that pushed vulnerable people out of sight, rather than addressing the root causes. She talked about Sophie and Ben, 2 children the same age as countless others playing in that park, who'd committed no crime except being born into circumstances that led to housing instability. The response was immediate and divided. Some praised Diana for highlighting a crisis that affected thousands. Others accused her of encouraging rough sleeping, of making parks unsafe, of interfering in local government. Diana doubled down. She organized meetings with housing charities, council officials, and homeless families. She wanted everyone in the same room, forced to see each other as human beings rather than abstractions. At one meeting, a council official explained their position. "We can't just let people sleep in parks. It creates sanitation issues, safety concerns." Lauren, invited by Diana, responded, "I don't want to sleep in your park. I want a home. Give me a home, and I promise I'll never sleep in your park again." The official had no response to that. Diana launched a campaign focusing on 3 things: increased emergency housing for families, reform of intentionally homeless classifications that punish people for leaving unaffordable housing, and ending the criminalization of visible homelessness until adequate housing was available. "You can't criminalize poverty," she said in one interview. "You can't fine people for sleeping rough when they have nowhere else to go. That's not policy. That's cruelty disguised as law and order." Some councils began changing their approach. Rather than removing homeless people from public spaces, they started directing resources toward rapid rehousing. Rather than treating homelessness as a criminal issue, they started treating it as a housing crisis. It wasn't fast enough, it wasn't comprehensive enough, but it was movement. 6 months after the park incident, Lauren and her children moved into permanent council housing. Diana helped them move in, bringing William and Harry with her. "This is important," she told her sons. "Remember that woman from the park? This is what happens when someone actually helps instead of just removing the problem from view." Sophie showed them her new bedroom with pride. She had a bed, a desk, a window with curtains. "It's mine," she said with wonder. "Actually mine?" Ben, now nearly 5, had his own room too. He'd placed his worn rabbit carefully on the bed, like installing a guard to ensure this was real. Lauren cried as she made tea in her small kitchen. "I can't believe this is real. We have a home. An actual home." "You always deserved this," Diana said. "The system should have provided it months ago." "But it didn't. You did." "I just made phone calls. You did the impossible work of keeping your children safe and fed and together through 4 months without housing. That's the real heroism here." Over the following years, Diana continued working on housing issues. She highlighted stories of homeless families, pushed for policy changes, funded legal aid for people fighting intentionally homeless classifications. She kept in touch with Lauren, watching Sophie and Ben grow up in stable housing, seeing them thrive in school, knowing that one intervention in a park had changed the trajectory of their entire lives. But she also knew there were thousands of other Families still walking around cities between library closing time and community center dinner service, still being told they couldn't sit on public benches, still being treated as problems to be hidden rather than people needing help. The bench in Kensington Gardens where she'd met Lauren became quietly famous. People started leaving care packages there, food, clothes, small amounts of cash, for homeless families. The council tried to stop it, calling it encouraging rough sleeping, but public pressure forced them to back down. Someone installed a small plaque, "Everyone deserves dignity, Diana, 1996. Years later, when Graham Blackwell retired from the council, he gave an interview where he admitted, "I was doing what I was trained to do, remove visible homelessness. Princess Diana taught me that maybe the training was wrong, that maybe we should have been providing homes instead of enforcing removal." William and Harry, now adults, would cite that afternoon in the park as formative. "Our mother showed us that having privilege means using it to defend people who have none," William later said. "That day in the park, she taught us more about duty and service than any royal protocol ever could." For Sophie, now grown, the memory of Princess Diana sitting on a bench beside her mother, refusing to let them be removed, remained vivid. She became a housing rights advocate, working to end the criminalization of homelessness. "I was 6 years old and terrified," she'd tell audiences. "A man in a uniform was trying to force my mom to take us away from the only place we could rest. And then a woman sat down next to us and said no. That simple word, no. You can't remove them. You can't treat them like this. No. Sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can say." Lauren kept a photograph of that day. Someone in the crowd had taken it and sent it to her through the charity. It showed Diana sitting on the bench, Harry crouched down talking to Ben, William standing protective behind his mother, and Lauren with her arms around her children while that council officer stood nearby looking uncertain. "This picture," Lauren would say, "shows what courage looks like. Not just Diana refusing to let them move us, but my kids seeing that someone thought we mattered, that we deserved to be treated with dignity even when we had nothing." The system didn't change completely. Homelessness persisted. Families still struggled. But the park incident had shifted something. A recognition that criminalizing visible poverty didn't solve poverty, it just pushed it out of sight. And that sometimes the most important thing someone with power could do was simply refuse to look away and say, "No, this isn't acceptable. These people matter. They deserve better." And sometimes that refusal to look away, that willingness to sit on a bench beside someone the world wanted invisible, changed everything.